there are pros and cons to it. So how are you feeling about your renter situation?
There absolutely are pros and cons, and I will say I've been extremely fortunate in that this apartment is the only apartment I've ever lived in. Definitely have tried to make it my own, and I'm fortunate I have an amazing relationship with my building manager, but that only goes so far. I can't paint, I can't replace certain appliances that came with it. I can't fully make it my own in the way, you could in your home. But then there's also great things that I have that are included. Like I have a pool here that I utilize that I absolutely love. There's a little dog park and a pavilion in an area that I can play with my family and my friends and different things like that. There are a couple utilities included in my rent. Not a lot, but any little bit helps. And so that was also a huge appeal to me as well. Like you mentioned, if something goes wrong, if something breaks, and a couple things have, I can just put in a maintenance request and a nice person comes in and deals with it for me, and I don't have to be financially responsible for that. I also don't have to put my time or effort into fixing that. Welcome back to the Money More podcast. I'm Madison Foster.
And I am Ryan Bowling. It is nice to be here. Madison, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. It's really pretty outside. I've had a productive day. How are you?
I am hanging in there. It has been busy week, busy month, really, but excited to talk about our topic for today.
Yes, yeah. So today we're going to talk a little bit about renting versus buying a home. It's an age-old question. Like, which is better? Is there one that's better? How do you decide which is better? Is one better for a certain time in life? So I'm excited to talk about that. We also have a really fun back and forth because you are a homeowner and I'm currently a renter. So I feel like we both offer some cool perspectives. So I'm excited to dive into the pros and cons and our own unique experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, this one I feel like is super interesting to me. Obviously, I'm a little bit older than you are, but I've had opportunities in my life so far to be both a renter and a buyer, and I think it makes for interesting topic of conversation. But before we jump too far into it, I want to ask a question. When and I did in early in my career, this was something that I obviously thought about, but when you picture yourself making it, like being something, did you picture yourself in a house? What kind of house? What did, like, actually making it look like?
Yeah, I think it's obviously evolved at different ages in life, which I think is probably good. But yes, I do think in most iterations of success to me, while of course it's more about like me being happy and healthy and my loved ones being happy and healthy, as far as my living situation, yeah, I would say 9 times out of 10, I pictured being in a house, owning a home, being debt free, having a car or two, the big nice house somewhere. So that was definitely and still is a piece of it for me, and I think still my goal for the short-term future. What about you?
Y Yes, I remember probably, I don't know, maybe it's 15 years ago, there was a popular ad run on TV that had this guy out there watering his lawn, and the joke was that he was up to his eyeballs in debt, and I remember, feeling that. So, the question, of course, is how do you feel about a mortgage payment? Is that something you want to take on? Obviously, we're gonna get into it here, but, just how do you feel about just mortgage payments in general?
Yeah, I don't wanna give too much away because I do need the listeners to tune all the way into the end, but I will just say mixed feelings, of course. That is no small thing, and especially I mean, the most common term for a mortgage is 30 years, which is horrifying to me to have a loan that locked in for that long. And some people, of course, do a 15-year or are in a different maybe financial situation and can pay it off much sooner. But that's no small thing to me. So it's definitely terrifying. I will say, even being a renter, it's also terrifying to be paying a rent payment every month, which is also no small amount, but not actually be like putting it towards owning something of my own. So I think I mean, there's 2 sides to anything, but I mean, yeah, it's definitely not something that I'm, like, super stoked about having a loan for that long, no.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, 30 years is like the bulk of someone's professional career. It is a long commitment to do a 30-year mortgage. So you're right. It's a lot to take on. But all right, enough teaser talk aside, then let's jump into this segment.
Yeah. So Ryan, why don't you start us off? Take us through kind of like a high level overview of renting versus buying as a concept, what those both mean, and then how different market conditions can impact people's choice.
Sure, absolutely. So, uh, obviously, you've got a renter situation where you are making a payment to someone else who owns your property. So, the benefits of that, of course, you get to enjoy usually some utilities that are thrown in there. They cover the costs of typically exterior damage, sometimes interior damage. You have a lot of protections from being an owner per se that are thrown in there when you're renting, and that's really helpful for people who don't want to take on the responsibility of home ownership. So that's great for people in some urban settings, people early in their careers, things like that. Housing is expensive, especially when you are weighing the costs of insurance for your property and everything that goes into being a homeowner. So on the flip side, when you have a mortgage, of course, you are building equity in that piece of property, which has value. So that's where it can be beneficial to be a homeowner so that you are essentially, while you're making payments to the bank, you're also, or whoever is servicing your loan, you are also building equity in something of real value. So, say you've been paying on a home for 10 years. As you're making those payments, you get back some of that value if you were to sell your house. So, that is an important piece of it. Of course, you do have to cover things like all of your utilities, um, trash and electric and gas. Sometimes those things can be thrown into agreements if you're renting, but not necessarily when you are doing it all because you own your property. So obviously, you also have interest rates on your mortgage. So whoever is servicing your loan is making a little bit of money off of the interest, and that's not something you have when you're a renter. So interest rates now, of course, they change pretty frequently, but somewhere around 7, 6, 8%. So a 6 to 8% range is what interest rates are at the moment, and that's a lot if you're paying something like $2 or $3,000 on a mortgage. It's a lot of added extra interest that is going into your payment. Also, you have property taxes that you have to pay every year. You don't necessarily do that when you're a renter. So it is a big decision in most people's lives. So whenever you are deciding whether you want to buy a house, if you're currently a renter, or sometimes even if you own your home and you're thinking about selling that to become a renter, you have to think about all the potential ramifications of that.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that you have at some point in your life made the switch from being a renter to now you are owning your home. So what were the biggest factors that pushed you to make that decision and make the switch from renting to buying?
Well, a lot of it goes back to that question that I led off with. Like, I wanted to feel like I had made something of myself. So, whether financially it was the best decision for me or not, that's difficult to say because the first property that I bought, I was fairly young. I was in my early 20s. It was a condo, so I was eager to get out of an apartment and into something where I could start building some equity into it. And so, me and my partner at the time, we purchased a condo in a kind of a small suburb here in the Midwest, and that was just before the housing crash of 2008. So, um, you can imagine how that ended up. There was a period where the value of the property actually fell lower than how much remained on my loan. So my mortgage was underwater for a time, and that was kind of a eye-opening experience that there are pitfalls to being a homeowner. But eventually, like with most things, through time, you climb out of it. I was able to sell the property, went back to being a renter for just a little bit, and then through my career, through advancements, through opportunities, purchased another house. And so now that was sort of a starter home. It was during a period in which buying was beneficial to people, and it made sense for me and my partner to get into a starter home. And then once children came into the picture, we realized we needed more space. We were able to benefit from an increase in the values of homes. So the value of that home almost doubled. It was about you know, 70% more than what we bought it for, and then we were able to upgrade because of that. So, the equity we had built in the house from both, having a low payment because we were able to have a low interest rate because we locked it in at a time when interest rates were low. Then the housing market came back up because that's certainly the thing with any market. There are ups and downs, and as the adage says, we bought low and we sold high. So doing that helped us upgrade to the house where we currently are. Our daughter has a lot more room to run around and to grow, and it really worked out. Of course, our mortgage payment is higher now because we have a bigger house than we did. But because we had bought a house at a time when it made sense, it really worked for us. We were able to do that. So I have over, my 40 plus years of being around, been on both sides of this coin. So it is interesting experiences to feel the highs and lows of homeownership.
So do you think going through the lows of that and purchasing a home right before the market crashed and going through all that with your condo, when you did make the decision to finally dip your toe back in and purchase again, did that make you more attuned to the market conditions? Were you even more aware of interest rates and making smart, timely decisions than you were before, would you say?
100%. It was one of those very hard lessons to learn. And there was even a period where, because I was in journalism at the time, that people were talking about furloughs. I even missed one monthly payment. And that, whenever you miss a monthly payment and you have to try to make it up, that follows you for the next 7 years. It goes on your credit report. So, when I went to do job interviews and background checks, that showed up and I had to answer a question like, "Hey, your credit report says you have a missed payment in your payment history. What happened there?" And I had to explain that I had to make up a payment because I had been furloughed, for a couple weeks from my job. So, yes, they are hard lessons to learn, but important ones because it helped, me get to a better situation to now have a real handle and an understanding of what it means to have a mortgage and what it means to be a homeowner, because I experienced those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we just have to learn through experience and look at you now using that information to maybe help somebody going through something similar. So it
I
all
hope
worked out.
so. No, I hope so.
Yeah, well, like we mentioned, I am a renter. So do we want to talk about like the renting side of things first, maybe, and then talk about your experience as a current homeowner?
Yeah, so, pros and cons, obviously, you have a great apartment. We can see just a sliver of it in the background, but, yeah, obviously, you, enjoy the situation that you're in, but like anything, there are pros and cons to it. So, how are you feeling about your renter situation?
There absolutely are pros and cons. And I will say I've been extremely fortunate in that this apartment is the only apartment I've ever lived in. So I went from moving out of my dad's house to this being the only apartment I've lived in. And that was, I am a very type A person. So I'm going to try to make informed, organized decisions. And even in high school, I was that way. So when I was in high school in the early years of college, trying to research apartments, knowing that I was going to move out soon, I really, like, did not take that decision lightly. I looked at a lot of factors, and because I researched it for so long and was so methodical, I think that that paid off in that, like, yes, this is what I thought it was going to be, and this is what I liked. Um, Also, just going through the process of moving one time has been more than enough for me, so I'm really hoping that the next time I move, it's, like, into a house that I'm in for several years because moving is no small thing, but I moved out, like I mentioned, while I was in college. I was fortunate to have a great relationship with my dad that I lived at home with. And since I had two jobs and was working my way through college, he allowed me to stay at my childhood home rent free, which was a pretty great deal. So if any of you have that option, consider it.
Yes,
But then,
I do
for
think more people are doing that, more often now, like, that's far more common than it used to be.
Yeah, and I'm extremely independent, so I was always like, "My 18th birthday, I'm out of here," and then I started seeing how much stuff actually costs, and I was like, "Maybe I just chill out for a second and save a little more." But I am a very independent person, so I did know that I was gonna be ready soon, and so there were a lot of factors that went into it, and the biggest one being, like I mentioned, I was working full time, I was also a full-time college student, I also had some family responsibilities and other things going on, so I wasn't in a financial place that I could afford a home. And so renting was really the only option for me. And it also just made the most sense for me at the time. Being like a 19, 20-year old, I was like, I don't know how to fix a house if something goes wrong and I don't have someone I can call. Like, what do you mean? That's my responsibility. And I wasn't in a place in life at that time. I'm a little more there now, but at that time I wasn't in that position. And so like for most people, the biggest factor for me was just the financial situation that I was in was housing prices at the time and things like that. But there are also cons to living here. I mean, you mentioned it looks nice and I appreciate it. I definitely have tried to make it my own, and I'm fortunate I have an amazing relationship with my building manager, and she told me when I moved in, make this place your own. But that only goes so far. I can't paint. I can't replace certain appliances that came with it. I can't fully make it my own in the way that you could in your home. Um, but then there's also great things that I have that are included. Like I have a pool here that I utilize that I absolutely love. There's a little dog park and a pavilion in an area that I can play with my family and my friends and different things like that. There are a couple utilities included in my rent. Not a lot, but any little bit helps. And so that was also a huge appeal to me as well. Like you mentioned, if something goes wrong, if something breaks and a couple things have, I can just put in a maintenance request and a nice person comes in and deals with it for me. And I don't have to be financially responsible for that. I also don't have to put my time or effort into fixing that, which is hugely helpful as well. But on the other hand, it is hard knowing, if I sit down and do the math as to 5, 6, 7 years that I've lived here, how much that is in rent that I've paid and how far that would have been towards a home and not actually building any equity here. And that's no small thing either. So
Mhm.
there's gonna be things that you're giving up and getting whichever way you go. This has worked out for me in the stage of life that I'm in right now. I'm not married currently, and so it's just me, so I don't need a ton of space. Obviously, when that were to change in the future, I would want a bigger place. I would want the option to paint and do all these things, but it's worked out perfect for where I've been in life and where I'm at right now. So,
Yeah, I think I've found that that's definitely the case. It usually is, a life stage, where you, are renting is far more common. I'm curious how long you've been there. How many times has your, rent increased? Do you know?
oh, I know, and I'm glad that you asked. So I typically sign a year lease. That's they I believe they offer here at mine, they do a 6 month or 12 month. I think in the beginning they offered 18 months, but they did away with that. And one thing I will say that's pretty universal, the fewer months that you renew for, your rent's gonna increase by a higher amount. They really appreciate obviously knowing that they're gonna have that guaranteed income. So if you can lock yourself in for 6 more months, that's a decent discount. And one thing I would really advise against, unless you're in like an extreme circumstance, is doing month to month renting. If I were to do that, that would like double my rent just for a month at a time. And so that's something that I've never had the need to do and I've never done. But almost every time I do a lease renewal, barring I think maybe the first year that I was here, but since then, every time I've had a lease renewal, so every 12 months, it's gone up. And one thing I will say that I have learned, which is one of those things that I learned through experience, hopefully can help someone. Like I mentioned, I do have a great relationship with my building manager. So every single time she sends me the lease renewal and it's higher, I email her back and I'm like, you know me, you love me, I'm such a great tenant, like, what can we do here? And I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, so don't run with this and say everyone will do this, but typically, if I just ask for her to lower it a little bit, like, I'm not saying she doesn't raise it at all, but not nearly as much as they're proposing, she normally does. She's normally like, "You know what? You're right. You're a great tenant, and, like, how about we do say it was going to go up $40, she'll normally do like 25, which is not a small thing. And so I would say, again, don't go into it with that expectation, but I simply ask. And she knows it's coming every single year. I know it's coming every single year. We have the same conversation. Um, but almost, I think there's only been 1 year that she's never not been able to. And that was just from pressure, I think, probably from the holding company of the building itself. And that was when inflation really was spiking and there was nothing that they could do. And but yeah, every year that they've done that, I've just simply asked, like, "Can we not raise it as much?" And honestly, they normally accommodate. And so my rent is definitely much higher than it was when I moved in, but it's still, like, extremely competitive compared to what new tenants would have to pay to rent here or elsewhere.
Wow, negotiating your rent payment, that's a
Yeah.
tip. That's a tip right there. I love I take it your rent's never gone down, though?
It has not gone down. I would love it. I wish that I could come on here and tell you it has definitely not gone down. It has only increased, which I think is probably more realistic, but no, it's never gone down since I've been here.
Okay, well, interesting side, I think, to that side of this debate, this equation of renting versus buying. But I can jump into, I think, maybe some of the pros and cons of home ownership. That sounds good to you?
Absolutely, yeah, you're a homeowner, so take us through your pros and cons.
Okay, so clearly, like you said, you are restricted a little bit in some of the decorating that you're able to do, some of the ability to really make a space your own. So when you're a homeowner, you of course have more options of what you can do. If you're willing to pay for it, you can do about anything that you want to do in your home. So I've done plenty of home renovation projects, been through a bathroom remodel, have built a sort of a pergola on a back patio. I've yet to really tear down any walls and expand any rooms, but my sister right now she's doing that in her basement. So you can add rooms, take away rooms, remodel, paint it anything you want. Being a homeowner allows you, of course, to do anything you want in your home. Hopefully, it's things that are going to increase the value because that's what you're really aiming for whenever you are owning your home and making payments on a mortgage. Hopefully, you get to a point where you pay your mortgage off. Sometimes that's 30 years. Hopefully, that's a lot sooner than that. So, definitely a tip. If you are making a mortgage payment, pay more than the minimum so that you can do a principal only payment in there and save some interest in the long run. So that's definitely one thing we would advise you to do. There's usually not a penalty to pay your mortgage off early, so make some principal only payments in there when you can. But that's obviously the biggest appeal, is being able to have full control over what your home looks like, how you use it, what works for your family, and then building that equity in your home. So instead of when you're renting, you're helping someone else pay off probably some type of loan. Instead, you're paying it off yourself, and every time that you do, you have more vested value in the home. So say you've been paying on it for 15 years, you're getting close to having it halfway paid off. You've got a $300,000 home, then you've got $150,000 in equity so that when you go to sell it, you would pay the remainder of the loan and you'd get to keep the rest of that. So that's two biggest pros, I think, to being a homeowner. And then, of course, the con is that often it's more expensive, so you have the interest on top of it. A lot of times your payment in general is just a little bit higher because you own a thing of value now, and that's worth a little bit more. So, cons definitely uh, an added expense. It's sometimes 50% higher than your what a rent payment's going to look like, but and also, your cons include having to pay for all of your utilities, that, not just your electric, sometimes there's gas, water, sewer, trash. all of those amenities, you've got to do for yourself, and that can be a lot to manage. Sometimes it's a benefit when you're renting to have some of those utilities included, but as a homeowner, that is not the case. So you also then have to consider, wear and tear on the place. So if you live in an apartment and you've got damage to your roof, that's something that the landlord or whoever is going to take care of. But when you're at your own place because you own it, you have damage to, say, a hailstorm comes through and you get damage to your shingles or a broken window. That's all stuff that's on you to have to replace, and those things, I mean, that's we preach about an emergency fund for some of those things, and that's why it's so important because those expenses happen. A few years ago, we had an aging air conditioning system. It completely went out, and that's a, five or $6,000 expense that you don't necessarily plan for, but those are things also that you have to consider, is that it can be expensive to be a homeowner, and that's the trade-off for it.
Yeah, well, and one listener tip I feel like we should mention as well that you mentioned briefly earlier. Um, just as far as like asking, because you never know, we are fortunate to work somewhere that is part of our benefit package as employees. They offer kind of a discounted mortgage rate for employees. And there's, of course, stipulations that go to that. But I've also worked places in the past that have had that same benefit. And so that is something to consider. I don't know how common it is in industries outside of the financial sector. Um, but sometimes that's a perk that you might have as well that you might not even know to take advantage of is locking yourself in as an employee somewhere that you can get a lower mortgage rate. And again, every little bit counts. And typically in the long run, that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars that you're saving. So that's something that I feel like is important to consider as well.
No, 100% agree with that. I've had mortgages that were conventional. They were locked in for 30 years. Your rate stayed the same and it didn't change. Currently, I'm on an adjustable rate mortgage. So when I asked you if your rent has ever gone down, well, fortunately, have been, I think, 2 years for me where my mortgage payment did go down because the cost of funds on the adjustable rate fell. So my mortgage payment actually went down. And that's a nice surprise whenever you get that news. It's not often and it's not typical, but it does happen when the rate market changes. So I have seen my mortgage payment go down for a couple of years. Typically, though, conventional mortgages, they're going to be locked in. Your rate's never going to change. But also, if you buy at a high time, so right now, we said rates somewhere between 6 and 8%. Don't let that really deter you from buying because you can always refinance. There could be a point 5, 10 years down the road. Mortgage rates have really fallen. They're back down to the maybe 2 to 4% range that we saw for a very long time. That's a great time to refinance. So you can see a drastic reduction in your mortgage payment if you are really eager to get into a house. So, say you want the freedom to decorate, but your interest rate is, at 7%. Well, you can still look at buying, and hopefully at a point, you can take advantage of a refinancing opportunity. And then suddenly, you've locked in your rate for, say, 4 or 5%, and your payment drastically goes down at that point.
Yeah, I feel like that's an important consideration that some people don't think of is that you do have that ability to refinance. There's at times sometimes a waiting period before you're able to do that. But that's an option for almost everyone and that can really help. But it seems like basically like you and I are in agreement. It's kind of a matter of flexibility versus stability. But I don't know that we're really recommending either way. I think it just depends on where you're at in life, what you're needing. I mean, I know people that are in their 40s that are still renting. I also know people that are younger than me that own a home. So I think it's one of those like there's not a one size fits all, but depending on where you're at in life and what your needs are, I think both can really make sense for people. So why don't you give us kind of just like again a high level overview of like what we've covered and what your final thoughts are to leave with our listeners?
Well, you're totally right that we are not advocating for either side of this coin, but it's a conversation and a discussion that I've had at several points in my life. I've obviously, as I've gone through my career, had opportunities to buy certain properties, to sell them, to become, a renter and then a homeowner and then a renter again and a homeowner again. I've done it several times, but obviously we've got pros to renting that include, typically a lower payment, especially. So we record this and we're based out of the Midwest, and typically, our cost of living is a little bit lower. But even on the East and the West Coast, those those rents can be more reasonable than they are for owning properties. So for renting, you've got a lower cost. You typically have some utilities included, and you're not liable for a lot of damage, especially to the exterior of your dwelling. So those things really helpful. But of course, on the con side, you have a little less flexibility in what you're able to do. Sometimes, maybe you've got noisy neighbors, you can hear through the walls, somebody walking, above your head. So those are drawbacks to it. But then on the home ownership side, buying a house for most people is the largest expense that you'll do in your life, and that's something to take pretty seriously. So it's a little more expensive to be a homeowner, but you're also making payments that help you build equity, so that you feel like in the end you have something tangible of value that you can either sell and hopefully recoup a lot of that money that you paid into, or you can, you know send it to your kids or to your grandkids. You have something you can pass along, but you are building equity and value into a place that you have lived in, that you have made your own, and of course, you have the ability to sort of customize and live how you want. But on the con side, you're responsible for everything that goes into it. So all the utilities, if you get damage to the property, obviously you'll have to carry some kind of insurance, but you're liable for the cost of repairs, and you have to figure out sometimes, who to call to replace a window if you've got water coming through it, or you get damage to your siding and things like that. So, like you said, we're not advocating either way, but it is an interesting topic of discussion, one that people have several times throughout their lifetimes, and really an important consideration to make. Fortunately, we have calculators on our website on ombbank.com to help you address this exact thing. You can plug in what a rent payment versus a mortgage payment looks like, and really look at the financial consequences of both, and what fits best for your life. So I appreciate the topic of conversation. How are you feeling about it now?
I'm feeling great. Yeah. And I love too that you mentioned the insurance that you have to carry as a homeowner. One thing I will say that it did not occur to me at that time, and I think it probably doesn't to as many young people. I also have to keep insurance. I'm required in my lease to keep renter's insurance. So that is something to factor in as well when you are calculating your rent payment. I will say that for me, that amount is pretty negligible. I have an insurance provider for like my car that is able to just kind of wrap it in and do like a multi-line discount. But it's still, few bucks a month. And that is something that, like I said, most, if not all, um, people that are renting to you are going to require for you to live there. So just consider that you also do have to keep renter's insurance, and that's protecting you just as much as it is the property that you live at. But just those little things that I think a lot of people don't consider when they are either way, when they're renting or buying. There's a lot of little costs that if it's your first time doing it, you just don't know till you get into it. And so it's important to budget ahead of time and do your research, just like with any financial decision. But like you said, there's tons of resources out there. It's also, of course, extremely crucial to talk to a mortgage professional. They're there for a reason. So if you are thinking you're ready to bite the bullet and buy, they can kind of talk to you about the ins and outs of that, what paperwork is required, if you are currently in a good financial spot, if your credit score is in a good spot for that. There's a lot of considerations. So it's important just to get a second opinion as well. But yeah, I feel like it just depends on where you're at in life. There's no clear cut, but I don't mind that. It's okay to not be black and white for this. So
Yes. Well, give it time. I'd say in a few years you're going to be having this discussion, this conversation all over again, and weighing the pros and cons. And that's the thing. I mean, the markets, They change all of the time. So I am certain that you're going to have plenty of opportunities. And just like me, I will too. Like, my parents recently considered downsizing. My father-in-law from home ownership to something like renting. Those things we have them often. So it's important to look at this through the lens of where anyone is in their life stage.
Absolutely. So if you guys see me, if you're a video watcher and you see me in a new studio, just know that I guess I've made the switch. I'll try to remember to let you guys know, but if there's a new background, you'll know why. But yeah, well, it was great to talk to you as always, Ryan. We have some really exciting topics on the horizon coming up. So we will see you guys next month. Thank you for tuning in.
Absolutely. New episodes of the Money and More podcast drop the first of every month. So look forward to those and have a good rest of your day.
The Money and More podcast is owned by OMB Bank. OMB and its affiliates do not provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. You should consult your legal and or tax advisors before making any financial decisions.